There we go. Hi, Scribblers. Welcome to our next exclusive chat. How's everyone today? All respond in the comments. Hey, Lindsay. Hey, Ben.
Hi.
Hey guys.
Oh, no. Every time I have to hear myself echo back. All right. So today we have Ben Rosenthal. He's an executive director at Katherine Tegen Books. That's an imprint of HarperCollins publishers, where he edits mostly middle grade and YA fiction with select picture books, graphic novels, and nonfiction. He's worked with award-winning authors, raised in St. Paul, Minnesota, and he lives in New Jersey with his family. Ben, do you have a new family member?
I do, yeah. I have a 1-month-old son named
Yay!
Henry.
Henry, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, we're going to drill you with a ton of questions.
Sounds
and
good.
make sure that all those sleepless nights really pay off today.
Yeah. I'm at my peak performance right now, so
yes,
it should be good.
I bet.
Mm-hmm.
Lindsay, you want me to go first, or do you want me to ask a question first?
Well, should we start off with one that I know you guys listening, I ask this every single time that we're talking to editors, but I just love hearing kind of like the origin story of how you got into publishing, specifically your current position. So can you kind of give us just a quick rundown on how you started out?
Yeah, I was an English major in college and thought I'd go on a path of career in sports writing, but decided that I didn't want to move to like a small town. So I ended up at an editorial assistant job at a small family-owned publisher called Enslow Publishers, and ended up being there for like 6.5 years, mostly working on like nonfiction for the school and library market. But in 2008, when the economy was really bad, we laid off like a ton of people, and I basically went from being like an editorial assistant to a senior editor, and took over like an entire list of an editor who was starting to do fiction, and I sort of expanded the list of fiction that they were publishing, and I got to go on this children's book editors trip to Germany in 2013, where I met a bunch of editors who worked at like the bigger houses in the city. And I got laid off shortly after that, and just started going on informational interviews with anyone who would meet with me at the big houses and other publishers in New York, and met an editor at Harper who eventually ended up getting me the job at Katherine Tegen. So
I love that. I think it's really cool to hear from editors and just anyone that works in publishing how they got their start, because it really is a grind.
Yeah. It's and everyone's path is different. I think, you can talk to like 10 people and you'll hear 10 wildly different stories. I think it's sort of tends to draw people with interesting backgrounds, I think. So
yeah, for sure.
Very cool. I'm going to jump into my first question. Ben, what was the first book you ever acquired, and why did you choose it?
Well, I guess the first book I traditionally acquired was called Paint Me a Monster.
Ooh, cool
and it
title.
was it was about a girl. It took place in like the 60s, and it went all the way into like the 70s. It was a really interesting book, and it was about a girl who sort of her family life started to break down, and her mother, as her mother and father got divorced, her mother became abusive, but it was told in these like really short vignettes, in a very like lyrical way. And so it was a really beautiful story, even though there was a lot of pain in it. And sort of ultimately she sort of, as a teen, like sort of finds salvation through art, and sort of is able to sort of escape the abuse of her mother. It was a really powerful story, and had a great title. I loved the title.
Yeah, that's an awesome title.
Yeah.
That's so awesome. So we're talking a lot about voice. Well, that was the theme of your box. I say it's your box because you're the chosen one that got to
Right. Yeah.
come in and give all these writers some awesome advice. So can you talk because voice is sort of a really hard thing for people to understand. It's kind of like this weird, mysterious thing. What is voice to you? And then can you give us an example of some of the most standout voices, that just the ones that you immediately think of that really pop into your head?
Yeah, I mean, I think voice is, it really is sort of not an easily defined quantity, but it's, I think, what's the closest to the actual like storyteller part of the author. Like when you're really getting down to the base of, when you sort of strip away everything else, it's sort of the author's command of telling their story and knowing their character, whoever it is that they're having tell the story, whether it's in first person or third person. And I think it's it means that when you have a really strong voice, it means that the author really, really knows their character very well. Has sort of like spent a lot of time with the character, and often I think too, sometimes I know authors say like the voice hits them right away, but I think sometimes like one of the things I often suggest to writers who are having trouble finding their voice is to try writing the same story but from a different point of view, as a way to sort of get to the voice that they want to get to. And in terms of like voices that I think are really, I mean, I work with an author named Tiffany D. Jackson, and she just published her third book, Let Me Hear a Rhyme. And each voice she's written has been singular and memorable. And I think, you know, she'd be certainly someone who I'd tell everyone to read, because I just think she's an absolute genius. And someone who I don't work with, I think like Laurie Halse Anderson is a great example.
Yes.
She's definitely one of my favorite writers. I just think, and she's written a lot of different kinds of books too, which sort of shows that she can tap into different voices. And I just think, you know, it's, if you can let the reader know on page one what you're getting into, I think that means you've found a pretty magnificent voice. So.
Awesome.
That was the most perfect, calming answer.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I don't know. I guess I found my way there.
Not nearly as concise with my answer. I'm like, I don't know, go read some books, voices out there somewhere in the universe. Ben, we almost chose Let Me Hear a Rhyme for our Scribbler box.
You did?
Yeah, it was like one of our really close runner-ups. So you were gonna get a book in this box either way.
Okay, great.
Awesome. Okay, I have a fun, tough question for you.
Okay.
What is more important? Because so every single month we're always like, this is the most important theme. Now this is the most important theme, because it's all important when you're really getting a manuscript that's, you know, done well enough to get kind of plucked out of the pile. So out of these three, I want you to put them in order: first, second, and third of importance to you: voice, plot, or characters.
Well, for me, first is easy. It's voice.
Okay.
And then I would probably go character and then plot.
Very good.
Just as a reader, sort of what I'm looking for. Voice is I think it's the most important, because for me, if I'm just talking about like what gets me to keep reading in like a submission, it's always voice, and it's always something. It's sort of like a gut level thing. It's just sort of like I feel when I'm done that this is just a voice that has to be out, you know, in the world. And I think, you know, plot and character, you can build more easily. Like when I'm thinking about what I can work with a writer, if the characters are really suffering, and I usually, there's ways I can figure out to help, or plot, same thing. Voice, it's not that you can't. I think that's something you can work on with an author, but that's the thing to me that I want to find most, because the other things I know, I feel more strongly that I can help them on that part of their craft. And voice is just, yes, to me, it's special. So
love it. That's great.
Yeah.
I'm trying to see. Tori, should we go into the audience questions yet? Or did we
Yeah,
just-
I was actually just texting you and said that.
We're getting a decent amount of questions here. Let's see. This one comes from Jasmine Velasquez. She says, "Hi, Ben. Having edited many projects, which are all unique in their own way, what's one common thing that usually needs to be edited or that you'd recommend authors look out for when editing their draft?" So like one of the things that you see the most issue with, I guess, when you're going through your own projects.
My own projects. That's an interesting question. I think one of the things that's often hard is finding the right place to begin the book. I think we have a tendency, and it's not necessarily just like the first page, it's also like the first, let's say, like 3 or 4 chapters. Because I think what the natural inclination is to like, all right, I love this character. Let me tell you every single thing about them and their background and their world. And so we can sort of set up where we're going. And, you know, some of that's obviously essential and important, but I think it ends up, you know, you just have early chapters that are just, you know, full of information that can be sprinkled throughout the book. And I think one of the things I try to always, the question I always ask writers is, and authors that I've worked with is this book starting at the last possible moment? Because if it isn't, then we don't really need to begin here, because we can, maybe that's part of another story. Or, urgency is so important. I think if your story isn't urgent, particularly when you're writing for kids, for young adults and children, I think it's even more important, because adults, their life is longer, so they can take more time getting into their stories. But kids, you got to get them right away, so it has to be urgent. And I'd say that's definitely something we often look at, is sort of, are we getting into the story quick enough? Are we getting to know the character? Are we making the reader want to follow this character? Because if you don't catch them in the beginning, then you're kind of in trouble.
Yeah. Okay. I have a question from Stephanie Gonsalves. And Stephanie, I'm sorry if I just butchered your last name. She said, do you think it's helpful to self-publish first and then try to get a traditional publishing deal?
I wouldn't recommend any particular path. I'd say, like, if you've tried to get traditionally published for a while and you're feeling sort of stuck in the mud, I don't think there's anything wrong with trying to self-publish, as long as you're aware of the work that's going to require, or if you're sort of managing whatever the expectation is you have. Like, if you just want to put something out on the internet and see if anyone reads it, I think that's fine. But like, if you're actually looking to, grow an audience, that's a much bigger challenge to do by yourself. That's why, in publishing, we have like 10 different departments to help you do that, in traditional publishing. So I think it definitely can be a path, and obviously it's worked for many people. It just depends on how much you want to work on the non-writing part before, as you're starting to make your way, because you don't have, an agent or an editor or publicist to sort of help you do that. But, I don't think there's a right way to, it's hard to say that there's a right path for anyone. So.
And I'm going to also jump in and say, I see this question a lot on our private Facebook group called Scribblers. And I will say, I always say to our subscribers on there, there's not really any harm in going ahead and submitting your work to traditional publishers and seeing what, if any, deal you get in front of you, because you don't have to accept a deal just because you put the book in front of them. You can always walk and say, I've decided to self-publish instead. So you might as well see what a traditional publisher is willing to give you. The only thing you're going to kind of waste there is time, because it does take time to wait for, there's a lot of people who want to traditionally publish. So there's a long reading list for every single editor. So it's going to take them time to get to your book. And there's some benefits, I would say, of, maybe going ahead and self-publishing if you're impatient, because you can get some reader feedback and kind of see, they'll tell you really quickly what you need to work on. And what Lindsay and I are well aware from our reviews of what we do really well and what we do not do really well. So there's some perks there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can, I mean, that's what, like, if you really are just looking for feedback too, like Wattpad, I know a lot of people use that as like a,
that's a great
as a place to get just like sort of reader feedback. So
there's one that can kind of be a good piggyback off of that. We've got a lot of writers that are hiring freelance editors before they actually start submitting things to agents and then editors. So what are some things that they can look for when they're trying to find a good editorial partner?
Well, I mean, if you're trying to like hire a freelance editor, I mean, I would just, I happen to know at least a few who, like, for example, were former editors at Harper. So I think you just want to make sure you know about their sort of what their credentials are, so that if you're going to take those steps to pay someone money to help you, fix your manuscript, you want to make sure you're hiring someone that has experience doing that kind of work in a, it doesn't have to be at a big publisher, but just has worked at a sort of a reputable traditional publisher, so that that they're coming with some experience and they're really going to help you make your manuscript stronger. And so, I mean, I would just make sure you do your research, or talk to people who maybe have used someone before, so that you're not wasting both your time and your money to not that that's the magic bullet, obviously, to get a freelance editor, but I'd want to make sure I found someone who has a good background.
For sure. Coming back to voice a little bit, do you notice that authors can lose their voice within the same manuscript? Because I notoriously do this all the time.
I was going to say, that is my issue right now too. I'm like, oh my gosh, I lost it. I have to go back and reread, get back into it again.
It's one of my biggest notes from my editors every time is, you sound so different halfway through and at the end than you do at the beginning. You need to go back and read the beginning. And usually I feel like I go back and read the beginning and I'm like, that's not the voice I want anymore. I actually want the voice that I found halfway through. So what are your thoughts on that? Does that happen to a lot of your authors, and how do you help guide them? How do you find, like, if it's kind of a different voice throughout the manuscript, how do you find the one that's right?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think that definitely happens. I think some of it can be like a natural progression. Like, not that the
that's true,
entire voice should change, but like there is a connection between voice and character, and as your character evolves, I think the voice can evolve with it. Obviously, it should never change so much that it no longer sounds like the voice we've had from the beginning. But I think there is some progression to the voice. But I think, I mean, I guess part of it is, if for some reason, and like you're 3/4 of the way through the book and you're finding that, oh, like this is actually the voice I really like, then I think you have to just think about what happened through the first part of the book that like informed how you wrote this particular part, to make sure that you're not altering the voice in an inorganic way.
Yeah.
So like you're sort of, because then you're sort of altering what you set out to do, and I think you just have to be mindful that any change you're making is one that makes sense to the story you're telling too. So if the voice is getting darker for some reason, well, that means the story must have sent the character in that direction. And do you want it to be dark? Do you know what I mean? Like, you don't want it to necessarily. So I think it sort of depends
I feel like
somewhat on the story, but.
I feel like you gave me like a get out of jail free card. Next time my editor says that, I'm going to be like, oh, no. Ben said that the story changed and the character's changing along with it. So I don't have to go back and rework my voice.
It's funny because I think even like in Opposite of Always, like I do think that obviously there's a consistency to the voice throughout. Yeah. But as the book goes, like in part 4, when I don't have to say like spoiler, I assume everyone read.
No, don't say spoilers. Don't spoil, just in case.
All right. Well, I guess
when things happen.
Yeah, when things happen. there's what I think, there are parts in the story where he gets more sort of introspective, because throughout the voice has this like very earnest quality because it's very funny, it's very light, but there is a lot of depth to the book. And I think as the book progresses and he's done these loops where he has to start over, there's almost at times like a weariness to him because he's gone through so much.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, like, that doesn't change the voice itself, but there is a maturation almost to the voice, that to me feels, it feels natural. I don't know if it does to everyone else. Obviously, I can't. It's gotten pretty good reviews, so hopefully people have liked it. But
See, in reality, it's the author being like, "Oh my gosh, I'm getting so tired of having to work on this story."
So anyway.
Awesome.
I've got another one just to kind of piggyback again off of voice because you actually have some really awesome points on it. How about authors that are writing stories with multiple points of view?
Mm-hmm.
How do they, you just take it away. You just made it sound like you already.
Yeah. Well, I've done it's because it feels like I hear that question a lot, and I don't know if it's because I've done a lot of books with them, but like, my first thing I always say is if you want to read a book with different points of view, that's amazing, is Mindy McGinnis's The Female of the Species. She writes from 3 different characters' points of view, all first person. And that's the first thing I always say is some of it depends on whether or not you want to write in first person or third person.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're writing in first person, then each voice has to be entirely different. Because you're introducing us inside the mind of different characters. And that is a huge, huge challenge. So I always I warn authors, like I'm doing a book now that'll be coming out next year where the author originally wanted to write 8 different points of view. Mm-hmm. And I said to him, I was like, you can try, but I'm going to tell you now that it probably isn't going to work. And ultimately we got down to 3. Because it didn't. And it wasn't that it was cool for the plot. Like, it kind of advanced it in really interesting ways, but it was only there to do that. And even though it's written from third person, it just didn't work because he couldn't create, just distinct enough voices. And it's really hard. It's just not an easy thing to do. And I think that's the thing to always keep in mind is you really have to remember that you're writing 3 different voices. You're not writing one. Mm-hmm. So if you want to write in first person, that's like that's the note I've given to anyone who's ever tried that. It's like, well, this character sounds like this other character. And then that doesn't really work very well because then we don't know who's talking. And they just blend together. And that's like the worst thing that could happen because then it's like, well, why are we even writing 2 different characters?
Sure.
So
all right,
it's a big challenge. I think it's great when people pull it off really well, but I'd say you got to make sure you're really ready for it.
Awesome. So Kelly can write, and Lindsay, it looks like we're getting kind of close to maybe we can each take 1 or 2 more. Kelly can write, ask, is it common for a single editor to do multiple kinds of edits, from development to line edits to copy edits, or would it be best to seek multiple editors for each of these? I'm guessing this is kind of if you're maybe self-publishing and you're hiring an editor, or maybe you're working with like a small publishing house. What are your thoughts on that? Do you feel like you could do everything from, you probably do line edits and development. What about copy edits?
I would never copy edit a book. Copy editors are like gods. I don't even know how to do it.
They're pretty crazy.
I think I know there are some freelance editors, like if that's what you're looking for, who usually have like different kinds of edits they can do. But even there, I would caution, if let's say you're like, for example, I know editors who I've worked with who are now freelance editing. I don't know if they're offering copy editing services, but like, you want to make sure they've done copy editing before because it's not the same. And I'm not saying that a great editor could copy edit a book, I think, but it's a different skill almost entirely, I think, in certain ways, because you have to be willing to really get into the minutia of everything. And Anyway, I think copy editing is the one. I think developmental edits, line edits, the same person can do it. I just think copy editing, you should make sure that they have done that before, because it's it's a really unique skill.
Ben, can you give a really quick rundown, like a kind of a one-sentence pitch of what development edits are, line edits, and copy edits, just for people who aren't familiar with it?
Yeah, developmental edits are really sort of more broad-based. So you're talking about, big things like character, plot, voice, pacing. You're sort of looking at the big picture items, of a story, and making sure that they're working. And then line edits is really looking at the manuscript on a line level. So, we're editing, that's where you're looking at like word choice, still like pacing to me too, and that kind of thing. And then copy editing looks at sort of continuity. So they'll like make sure that you haven't dropped a character who was like earlier in the book, or that you like didn't change a character's name, or that you didn't, the story took place started on a Monday and it's been 7 days. Somehow you're like, on the following Wednesday. I don't know, those kinds of things that like I personally miss sometimes. So.
All right. Lindsay, you have any last question?
Yeah, the annoying dinging is someone put me in a group chat and now they're all responding and I'm like, oh my gosh.
I was wondering, I was like texting everyone going, who's doing the dinging? Stop with the dinging. Oh my goodness.
Can you just really quickly tell us maybe a couple of your upcoming releases that you're super excited about?
Yeah, of course. Well, Let Me Hear Rhyme, I'll just say again, because it just came out yesterday by Tiffany D. Jackson. And it's about 3 teens in Brooklyn who lose their best friend. He's murdered, and he was an aspiring rap artist, and they try to keep his memory alive by sort of blowing up his career, even though he just passed away. And I have a new middle grade series coming out this summer called Monster Street, which is kind of very much an homage to the Goosebumps series, if you like R.L. Stine.
Oh, fun.
And I have a book coming out later this summer called Let's Call It a Doomsday, which is about 2 girls, one whom is afraid of the end of the world and one who knows when it's going to happen. And it's sort of a friendship story with this end of the world idea lingering over them. It's really
very cool.
Very funny, very poignant.
And is there any one book that you're really hoping lands in your inbox? Anything that you're just dying to see?
I'm like out of submission mode. So
That's true. That's true.
I'm really looking for middle grade, particularly like I'd love to find I'm looking for like middle grade standalone. So, and it could be in any genre, but like contemporary, historical, fantasy. But a lot of my middle grade is series. So I'm really on the hunt for like standalone novels in middle grade, but kind of across genre. I'm not too genre specific.
Cool.
So yeah.
Awesome. Well, Ben, congratulations on your new baby boy. And thanks so much for hanging out with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is fun.
Thanks, Scribblers, for coming and listening. This chat will be live and available for another 60 days. So enjoy it. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you all next time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.